Well, how many of y'all are suffering from senioritis yet? Please be honest and raise your hand. Wow, more staff members raise their hand than students. But it's true, isn't it? Yes, that's the fourth term can be a difficult term a little bit, but every term is important to our ministry training. Michael Phelps is considered to be the greatest Olympic swimmer of all time. No one ever thought that an Olympic swimmer would win 8 gold medals in one Olympics, but that's exactly what he did. And of course, throughout all of his Olympic games, he ended up winning 28 medals, and I believe he's the most decorated Olympian of all time. 23 of those were gold. But the remarkable thing about Michael Phelps is that as a child, he suffered from ADHD. And he even at times was on medication for that. Most people assume that with ADHD that people suffer from restlessness, impulsiveness, a very short attention span, but there's something else about ADHD people that is also true. They also have an increased capacity to remain hyper-focused on an activity that they're passionate about. And that's what Michael Phelps has been able to do to kind of exploit the positive side of ADHD. He's proven that he can beat the most disciplined of all swimmers in the world, and he stands as an inspiring example to anyone, especially people with a little bit of a disability. He started another thing that he's able to do is visualize success before he starts to swim. And this is something he started to do at a very young age. He's able to see past everything and see on to the end and see the success in his mind. And that helps him achieve his goal. It helps him get there. Because in his mind, he's already done it. So that everything in between is just what it takes to do it, and it's already done in his own mind. He says once you're passionate about your objective, nothing can stop you. Why do we like stories like this? What is it about stories like Michael Phelps that, why do we like them? We like them because they inspire us. When we hear stories like that, we think if he can overcome, if he can do something like that, then so can I. Open your Bibles, if you will, to Hebrews chapter 11. Hebrews chapter 11, it's got a lot of nicknames, the Hall of Fame of Faith, the Hall of Faith, what have you. And this is one of my favorite chapters in the Bible because of all of these inspiring characters. And of course, they all overcame something. They all did something extraordinary. They were all obedient to God, and they all proved to be an inspiring example of greatness of faith. Let's take Noah, for instance. Noah was commissioned by God on a 100-year boat-building expedition. He's told, yeah, it's going to rain 100 years from now, and you need to build a boat. Well, it had never rained before. Nobody had ever seen it rain, including Noah. But the text tells us that in reverence, he prepared an ark. So in other words, he did exactly what God asked him to do. He fought adversity. He probably was ridiculed up one side and down the other. And it wasn't just for a few months. It was for 100 years. But that's what landed Noah here in this Hall of Faith chapter, so to speak. Now, this chapter is an excellent place for us to go study and learn what faith is. It's a valuable chapter in helping us understand faith. But that's not why it's there. That's not why these characters are in there. That's a side effect of it. But if you turn over to Hebrews chapter 12 and look at verse 1, we find out why all of these people are listed in Hebrews 11. And the writer says here, therefore, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses surrounding us. And then he's going to go on to make the point, which we'll read in just a moment. But these characters are here to inspire. They are examples. They provide strength and encouragement and inspiration to keep on keeping on. And from here, the writer springboards into what is really the main point of the entire letter, and that is, don't give up on Jesus. That's the whole point of why the Hebrew writer wrote the letter. So let's read verse 12, verses 1 through 3. And what we're going to see this morning, very briefly, is that the writer provides 3 disciplines that should result from the inspiration to stay faithful. Let's read. Therefore, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let us lay aside every encumbrance and the sin which so easily entangles us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. For consider him who has endured such hostility by sinners against himself, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. The first thing we notice there about the middle of verse 1, the first discipline that we see that we have to adopt is to remove the obstacles. We have to get rid of anything that might slow us down. Now, when the reader would have read this back in the first century, running as they understood it at that time, there was a common thing that was done. A runner would strip off any unnecessary clothing before running the race. And I read in one commentary that there was even a phrase, strip down for the race. I don't know how far down they stripped, but they would strip down what they did not need so that they could run as fast as possible. They removed whatever was necessary, whatever might have been in their way. You know your obstacles. You're aware of what gets in your way, and only you can decide if you're willing to lay them aside. Don't let some obstacle that could easily be removed slow you down in your growth process or anything in your journey of faith. Don't let any of it slow you down. Now, there's a specific obstacle also mentioned in this text, and that is the phrase that is right after lay aside every encumbrance, and he refers to the sin that so easily entangles us. Now, for those of you that just had the privilege of finishing up the Greek class, you remember learning about the article. Well, sin contains the article in this sentence. So he is referring to a specific sin, probably. Not sure on that, but as I understand it, that's probably what this is. It is a specific sin. Now, given the context of the letter, that is probably the sin of abandoning or rejecting Jesus. The whole reason the Hebrew letter was written was to keep the recipients from leaving the truth and going back to that which would not save them. So the bottom line here is don't give up on Jesus. Don't lay Jesus aside. Whatever else may entangle you, lay that aside, but hang on to Jesus. Don't lay him aside. As I read Hebrews, I can't help but wonder how they had come a good distance as Christians, but were now ready to give it up. I think you've come this far, and now you're thinking of abandoning it. And I think, how could they think that way? But then I realize that this could happen to anyone. Satan will take every chance he possibly can to derail you. He'll derail your faith at any chance he can. But if you ever start thinking of giving up your faith, I want to give you an illustration to apply just a little bit of logic to this. And think about it from a logical standpoint. As most of you know, I am from Iowa originally, and when I go home, it's a 900-mile drive across some of the most beautiful scenic land you'll ever see. Nothing like West Texas and western Kansas and central Nebraska for a scenic drive, right? The beautiful nothingness that is there. But it's a 900-mile drive. And yes, if scenery is your thing, this is not the trip for you. But I point that out to say that's not the objective. What's between here and there is not the objective. That's just what I have to do to get there, right? I've got to go through West Texas, western Kansas, central Nebraska. You get the idea. But what if all of a sudden, what if I get 800 miles into that trip? I'm driving along and I get 800 miles into that trip and I just think, well, I'm not going to go any further. That's silly. That's absurd, isn't it? And when we hear it in those terms, we see the absurdity of giving it up. Because for one thing, that would get me into western Iowa, and there's nothing there either. And so I've abandoned the trip less than 2 hours before I get home. That's what it would be if at this point in our faith, we just decided to abandon it. It's really no different. We've come this far, and the prize is just right there. So don't abandon your faith. Hang on. You've come this far. Don't stop now. And as you enter the final stretch of this school year, and you consider your training in ministry, apply the same logic. You've come a long way this year. And whether you're level 1, level 2, the fourth term is very important, especially level 2. They have put some very important classes in this term that are designed to be the last ones to be practically applied as you're about to jump into ministry. So see it through to the finish. Don't stop now. Well, in order to finish strong and stay motivated to the end, we need endurance. Look again at verse 1 in chapter 12. Because as he goes on toward the end of verse 1, he says, "Let us run with endurance the race that is set before us." So we need endurance. We need to have the conviction to finish the race in order to see it through to the reward. Now, he's already addressed this. Look at Hebrews 10, verse 35 and 36. This is a repeated thing in the book of Hebrews. He tells them back here, "Therefore, do not throw away your confidence, which has a great reward. For you have need of endurance, so that when you have done the will of God, you may receive what is promised." So we need endurance. We need to stay strong. We need to stay the course. We need to stay on Jesus. Consider those cloud of witnesses in Hebrews 11. Look at what they did and do it. I had a customer back when I was in business in Iowa, and a customer in my shop, and he was a repeat customer, and he was a very, very successful man. He had built several things from the ground up and was independently wealthy. And I'd kind of become friends with him, and just in a joking conversation one time, he told me, he said, from a young age, I just looked at successful people and just did what they did. That's how I found success. That's what we need to do. We can do the same thing with the endurance of our faith. Look at how those Old Testament characters endured and stayed faithful. Look at what faith was, because they describe it, they define it, and do what they did. They were strong. They were perseverant. They were obedient. They gave it everything they had. And that's exactly what we should do. But endurance has to be developed. Endurance is not just something that you wake up one day and think, I've just got endurance. It's not like that. And of course, physical endurance is the same way. That's where we can really see this. For example, I don't think it's any front page news that I am not in shape to run a marathon. You know, I've been trying the Mountain Dew diet for a while to see if that would give me some endurance. Needless to say, it's not working. It isn't like Gatorade, apparently. But I would need to train, and I would need to train a lot in order to ever be in shape to run a marathon. Now, could I do it? Well, I think so. If my joints could take it at this age, probably. But you see the idea. It has to be built. And also, spiritual endurance, like physical endurance, if we don't maintain it, we will lose it. It will go away. It has to be ongoing. Don't slow down. Make your faith conditioning a lifestyle. practice good spiritual disciplines continually and consistently. Removing obstacles and building endurance requires one huge ingredient, and that is focus. If we're not focused, all of these other disciplines are not going to matter. Back in chapter 12 again, if you look at verse 2 here, he says, fixing our eyes upon Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. In other words, we need to look away from other things and we need to focus on the prize. We need to focus on Christ. It would be awfully hard to win a race if we were looking all around us or if we were looking behind us or even if our mind wasn't focused. If you look back at, how many of you have watched Michael Phelps race when he swims? Do you ever study him and notice there was an obvious method that he went through before every race? He had the headset in, he was looking down, he was, all this kind of stuff and flopping it, getting his arms ready, all of this. All of this was for him to get focused. And we have to think about what we can do to focus our faith. We have to keep our eyes on the prize. So we need to make Jesus our greatest motivator. Jesus is the pioneer of our faith. That's probably the best word to describe author and perfecter in Hebrews 12 there. He went before us to show us how to do it. That makes him the complete example. And the author here goes on to give us a little bit of a reason why he's the complete example. And I find this interesting. Notice the text says, who for the joy set before him endured the cross and so forth. Well, for there it means instead of. The joy was not the cross. Jesus chose the cross instead of the joy that he could have. He endured the shame of the cross, literally becoming a curse for us. That's what Galatians 3 and verse 13 says, is that Jesus became a curse. And he did that so that we even had a chance. And he made that choice for you. You couldn't be sitting here today as you are without that. So let that soak in. Think about that as you work on focusing on the prize. Consider him and what he did for you. He endured the most horrendous hostility that a man could ever endure from his enemies. And of course, this is the application point of the entire letter, as we mentioned at the beginning. Before you give up on anything, especially your faith, consider the magnitude of what Jesus did. Don't grow weary. Don't lose heart. Jesus went before you so that you could win the prize. So stick with him. How many times do we choose some joy that is set before us instead of what we'd ought to do? If you struggle to make good, disciplined decisions from time to time, just remember what Jesus did for you and let that lead you in the right direction. We're going to face tough times, and we need endurance. So press on and do not give up. This text is obviously designed to be a great motivator for our Christian walk. But this morning, I want you to also consider it for your Christian walk as it relates to your training here. Term 4 isn't easy for any of us. Like I say, more faculty raised their hand when asked if they had senioritis. It's all of us that struggle with Term 4. It isn't just you. But don't give up until the very end. You need to remember that you're training for ministry. And oftentimes, your discipline level and your endurance is going to have to be far and above many other Christians. There are times when you may not have a whole lot in you that someone needs you to have a whole lot in you. So don't let your mind leave SIBI before you're finished, because you need all of your training. If you've got something in your way that is hindering your ability, get rid of it. Satan is going to try to put up every obstacle that he can. So don't let him. When he puts them up, kick them out of the way. Practice good spiritual disciplines so that you can stay in the best spiritual shape of your life always. Remember all of those elements that Monty taught you. I hope you took good notes in spiritual disciplines, and I hope you soaked it in and did everything you could with that, because that is one of the most important classes here. Now, for those of you that have wisdom literature with Charles right now, there's going to be some exercises in there that will help you get into that habit as well. Practice those disciplines. They're so, so important. And don't lose your focus. Keep your eye on the prize. Keep your eye looking beyond everything that is in the middle and see the success at the end. That's how you stay focused. Consider all that your Savior went through for you. He didn't have to, but he did. You too can choose. So make the right choice. Make the choice to set your heart and your mind on finishing the race that is set before you. Don't stop now. Finish strong.